Good afternoon, everyone. It's great to be with you. I want to thank Commissioner Peterson for being here. You're going to hear from State Veterinarian Dr. Hafes. You're going to hear from epidemiologists. And this is a combination of the Department of Agriculture, Board of Animal Health, and Department of Health. And then you're going to see this bipartisan group of agricultural leaders up here, Senator Westrom. We may be joined by Senator Putnam and Rep. Anderson and Hansen in a very not just bipartisan, nonpartisan tradition in Minnesota around agriculture, protecting agriculture, and making sure that Minnesota is on the front end of the work around, specifically today, on H5N1, or highly pathogenic avian influenza. And as the situation in Minnesota this week, you saw, and you'll hear more from the experts on this, a positive test in a dairy herd. And then as we're moving closer to our migratory birds as they start to move here in the spring, I think, and Dr. Hafes will tell you this, I think either this week or next week, we are going to be deemed, ironically enough, free of avian influenza, but that is going to be short-lived because of the nature of this. The good news on this is through the work of the experts in this state, collaboration with the United States Department of Agriculture, and the incredible support we've received from the legislature, able to have the most robust and, I would say, effective monitoring and ability to contain of probably any of the states. And this is going to become more challenging as we move forward. So you're going to see some of these issues come up as we've released some budget numbers. There's a really great program that the legislature's put together, which is our emergency fund that sets over at about $4 million in the Department of Agriculture to be able to deal with some of these things. And then the USDA with helping on some of the indemnity for as we start to depopulate some of these flocks as avian influenza increases. And so it's a tough time to be in agriculture right now. It's tough in Minnesota. We've gone from droughts to floods. We have avian influenza. We have trade uncertainties that play a role in this. I think the one consistent piece of this is that our producers know and the people of Minnesota know there is a unified front around biosecurity and protection of our agricultural business and the health of Minnesotans that is still very strong. And so I'm grateful for that. I'm going to let the experts dig into a little bit to tell you where we're at on this, what to expect, and some of the things that the public may be curious about, whether it's drinking milk or the things that they care about. The experts will help you with that. We'll hear from all these folks up here, and then we'll take any questions at the end. With that, Commissioner of Minnesota Department of Agriculture, Tom Peterson.
Thank you again, Tom Peterson, Commissioner for the Minnesota Department of Agriculture. And as the governor said, this week we announced our first positive H5N1 in a dairy herd in Stearns County. Oddly enough, my Facebook memories told me that it was 3 years ago today that we had the first case as avian influenza returned in the spring of 2022. And it had been previously here in 2015, I think almost to the week that we had it then. So this is not something that the state is not unfamiliar in working with, and I want to highlight that unfortunately or fortunately Minnesota is very well prepared in dealing with this because of what we went through in 2022 when we had over 100 cases in that spring. And then the virus, as you've seen over the years, has changed. And I think the spring of 23, we had 2 cases, but then we got hit pretty hard in the fall. And then as you saw this last summer, we saw it in dairy cattle in central Minnesota mostly, but around the state. And we were able to move through that at that time. And so, but as the governor said, we've continued to watch that. We have not had any poultry cases in enough time that we would be declared Friday as being free of HPAI. I want to say, though, as the governor said, we're watching the migration very closely. I live on a river, and my anxiety level goes very high when I see the swans and the geese and everything that are returning at this time, and so we can watch that. We also work with the Department of Health about wastewater detections, and we've seen HPAI detected in wastewater. So we know the virus is circulating. It's just at what strength and where as we look forward. I also just want to emphasize, too, that partnership piece is very critical between the Department of Health, the Board of Animal Health, the USDA, the different agencies in Minnesota, whether that's Fish and Wildlife Service, Veterinarian Services, the FSA, and then the University of Minnesota is also a very key partner in this, whether that's Extension working with the producers, and then the labs doing the testing for us on the virus. I also want to emphasize that pasteurized milk is safe to drink. The USDA and the FDA have been testing that, and the routine surveillance has not found any danger to the public in pasteurized milk and properly cooked meat too as well. A couple other things I just want to mention that I think are important is working with the USDA, as the governor said. We have a new USDA secretary, a change of administration. I was in Washington, D.C. 3 weeks ago where Secretary Rollins rolled out a 5-point plan. At the top of that plan is biosecurity. That's something that we've been working very hard on with the department and the board and the USDA for quite a while, securing audits. Some of you may have seen a bill that the legislators, actually, Senator Putnam's not here. Oh, he is here, all right. But that he championed and others was a bill to help farmers install lasers, or turkey lasers, as we affectionately call them. Very proactive approaches that we've taken to secure those buildings. I also want to mention, the governor said, a stressful time in agriculture for farmers. I think that, farmers, if you think about turkey or dairy, but, keeping in mind for dairy farmers, this isn't always fatal. They're going to see a loss of production. They're not going to normally see mortalities, but for those turkey farmers that are in close proximity, and remember, Minnesota is #1 in turkey production, Tori, and we're in the top 10 in dairy production. And so our issue is where a lot of our dairy cows are, a lot of our poultry is, and being #1 in turkey, and that's why we make this, a big case. And so working with the USDA, Secretary Rollins came out with a 5-point plan that is, tops on the list is biosecurity, but also contains things as vaccine development, which is something that our administration has supported. That research and development of vaccines has to be a tool in the toolbox. One other thing I want to say why, we're on higher alert right now is we've watched what's happened in California, for example, where they've had over 700 of their 900 plus dairy farms have gotten H5N1 in their dairy herds. Minnesota has over 1,600 dairy farms. And so, again, we want to be in that situation where we're being very close and very much on top of this as we look at that. We are currently undergoing, I want to say our process works. So the USDA, working with them, are doing a mandatory testing of all dairies in all states, and the states work on a plan. Our plan of testing all dairy farms every month is what found and identified this virus. So we have tested almost 1,500 dairy farms in the last 3 weeks, and we've had the one positive sample, and we'll continue testing those. I just want to mention real quick in closing 2 things. One is that the governor mentioned the support the legislature has given us and working in having an ag emergency account, which helps us in dealing with all of these farms and different situations that we've had, including being prepared and educating. Those funds in that emergency account had been at $4 million. We're getting down into between $1 million and $2 million, depends on some of those dollars we get reimbursed from the USDA. So I think you'll see legislation. The governor has an increase of $4 million in his budget to help us with surveillance, for salaries for responders, equipment maintenance, and depopulation if needed. And so we greatly appreciate those investments. We've also used what's essentially our bank at the Department of Agriculture, our Rural Finance Authority, to unlock zero interest loans for farmers that may need that. Finally, in closing, I just want to also emphasize the worker component of this, and we'll hear from the Department of Health on that, but that too is very critical. That's not something we've shied away from. Our farmers value their workers, who in most cases may be their family, and so we work very closely with that, and they'll talk more about that. So I'll turn it over now to Dr. Hayes with the Board of Animal Health.
Thank you. Commissioner Peterson stole some of my talking points, but I'm going to reiterate them. Just the anniversaries, I think, are intriguing. So 3 years ago to the day that we started this episode of highly pathogenic avian influenza in poultry. It was a year ago yesterday that we saw our first case of H5N1, the virus that causes avian influenza, in dairy cattle in Texas. And it just seems ironic that we're coming up on the end of this week. We would actually be declared high path free in our commercial poultry, just meaning that we haven't had a case since January. As the governor and the commissioner alluded to, those are small victories, and we hold our breath knowing that it's short-lived. The migratory season is upon us. That's when we expect this virus to return, and we are right on the cusp of it. I'm hearing from my colleagues in some of our southern states, central Midwestern states that are talking about the invasion, I'll call it. So we are bracing ourselves, but we will enjoy a brief period of quiet. Should never say that out loud because I will have calls when I get back to my desk. Just to talk a little bit about this virus and kind of the peculiarities of it. So avian influenza is an influenza virus. We know what influenza does in people, and there are some similarities in animals, and in particular in poultry. So my point with that is this virus has a habit of changing, getting ahead of us and kind of rerouting when we think we have it figured out. So in previous years, we've been able to rely on the migratory season to allow the virus to migrate along and enjoy some downtime. That has not been the case recently. So in the past year, we've seen this virus kind of hovering around and sticking around. Some of that is due to migratory birds sticking around. We've had some mild winters, and the migration hasn't been as robust in other years. But we also recognize that it is now in some of our residential species, so both domestic and wild bird species. So the cases aren't spiking like they have in previous years, but we're getting kind of a slow murmur of those cases where they're going into our quiet seasons, into the summer and into the winter. Of particular concern is this virus spreading into dairy cattle, and we heard about that, as I said, the first time was a year ago yesterday in a Texas dairy, and that virus flourished in dairy cattle, flourished in mammary tissue specifically, and milk, and was able to really move around the country just with cattle. We had a handful of cases in Minnesota. We were able to quarantine those facilities and get them cleared of the virus and move on. But we're looking at new infections now. So the federal directive to test all dairy cattle came out earlier this year, late last year actually. We started our surveillance in February, decided we wanted to test all dairy farms in Minnesota to determine if the virus was present and to what extent, and from there do our quarantines and due diligence to make sure we're eliminating it again from the environment. The other thing I want to point out about the virus in relation to we know how these things change. The different sequences or the genomic sequencing, that basically the family tree or fingerprint of this virus changes every year, and it's been very interesting as part of our response, understanding how this fingerprinting works and how we can detect where that virus spread amongst herds and amongst flocks. But we also recognize it also changes what sequence or what virus type is coming through. So I mentioned that because the virus we had last summer is not the virus that we're dealing with now. We have one detection so far. I think that's a great sign. We've gone through nearly 90% of our dairy herds in Minnesota and ended up with one detection. So we're doing some follow-up work to determine if this is an early detection or a late detection. The amount of virus in the sample was actually pretty low. So that tells us we're on one end or the other. More to come on that. But in closing, I just want to reiterate some of what Commissioner Peterson said. Just the collaborative nature of Minnesota has been instrumental in all of our disease responses. So we talk about highly pathogenic avian influenza, but there's a lot of work going behind the scenes to work on other potential disease incursions that we don't have and we don't want to have, but how would we respond? It wouldn't happen without collaboration with all of our state agencies. So Department of Agriculture, Department of Health, the DNR, the diagnostic lab at the University of Minnesota, and also our local USDA partners, just really approaching this with the One Health approach, understanding that Disease in one species affects us all. It affects industries, it affects the food chain, so we work very collaboratively together to make sure that we are keeping tabs on everyone and everything. So I just want to thank everyone who's been involved in that, and I will turn it over to our Department of Health.
We won't do a proactive statement from health, but we're here to answer your question. You have some specifics on that. What I think I do now, as you heard this, no small piece of this is the experts in the legislature and the 4 leaders who are with us. I would invite them up if there's anything they'd like to share that hasn't been. So,
thank you, Governor. Hi, my name is Representative Paul Anderson. I'm a farmer. I live in west central Minnesota, and I've said a lot before that Minnesota is a powerhouse in agricultural production. We grow a lot of turkeys in the state, a lot of chickens, and milk a lot of cows here in Minnesota. And I'm confident that we've been through this before, going all the way back to 2015, that we have the personnel and the agencies and the financial wherewithal to deal with any situation that comes up. It's been my pledge on the House Ag Committee that we fully fund the Board of Animal Health, give them the tools they need to work in this situation as things evolve as the virus changes or whatever, but very confident that we have the people in place, and they do a great job. And just want to say thank you, and thank you all for coming too, because you got to get the word out there as well, that our products are safe, and we do a good job, a great job in the agricultural production area. And just thank you for the job you do. Thanks.
Senator Western.
I'm Senator Tory Westrom, also represent Senate District 12, where Representative Anderson is part of, representing Stearns County as part of my Senate district. Lead on the Senate Agriculture Committee. This is something we've been monitoring for a while, but you know, everybody likes to eat, so keeping the food supply safe is pretty important. And that's what you're seeing here. Replenishing the emergency funds, something we're taking serious in the Senate Ag Committee, working with Chair Putnam, and on behalf of our farmers and, of course, the consumers, because it's all part of the food chain. And so we're glad to see the emphasis put on safety and getting ahead of the curve as much as we can, having these response dollars available as we've hear from farmers that go through this trying event if they have the bird flu. We've heard from some farmers in my district and across the state, and it's a heart-wrenching story when they discover this issue. Of course, the transition of the new transfer to dairy cattle is another new concern for farmers. Of course, not as devastating as the turkey or chicken barns, but certainly a concern, and we want to be ahead of it, and that's why you're hearing us talk about this and trying to get the word out for the consumers on behalf of the state of Minnesota. Thank you.
Thank you, Governor. Rick Hansen, State Representative, co-chair of the Ag Committee with Paul, and we will actually leave from here to go down to the Ag Committee to co-chair that committee, and we'll be talking a bit about this. You know, I'm reminded of the old saying from Jurassic Park that nature will find a way. And this virus, we have been fighting since 2015. I remember the response then, where it was more instant and rapid because it hadn't been here. But the virus keeps evolving, and we keep dealing with it. It keeps changing. And so I want to follow up on what Commissioner Peterson had said, that not only farm workers, but the workers in the processing plants who deal with dairy or deal with poultry, we need to make sure that we're providing an avenue for them for protection. Yesterday in the Environment Committee, I asked the DNR Commissioner about turkey season coming up and hunters who are out. If they find a dead turkey, or people who, I remember last time we had bird feeder questions where people are like, I've got a dead bird by my bird feeder. So I want to reinforce that, you know, it's a collective effort, a bipartisan effort, but also the agencies working together to make this happen. And it's really critical the Department of Health is here, because this potential, why are we so afraid of this? And it's the question of whether it jumps into people. And so when you move into mammals from birds, then that potential of getting into humans is there. So the response we're doing, we want to make sure we can, and I want to thank the governor for putting dollars into the program, and each of these agencies working together to try to make sure we can protect Minnesota, whether that is in agriculture or the workers or people who are watching the birds out of their window. We're all in this together, even though it may not seem like it when we're only focusing on the ag side, but it's something that surveillance, monitoring, and then that scientific response. We have invested a lot in the University of Minnesota. The last time we invested in the veterinary lab, and those investments pay off when there is a crisis or when there is chaos. So we want to make sure we keep doing that and staying up to date. So thank you.
My name's Eric. I'm Eric Putnam. I represent the Greater St. Cloud area in the Minnesota Senate, and I'm chair of the Committee on Agriculture, Veterans, Broadband, and Rural Development. And I just want to take a moment to acknowledge that it might sound scary, the idea of a disease like this. Might sound frightening to the public, but I hope that you have the faith that you should have in your leadership in the Capitol. One thing that we've talked about a little bit, but I want to be very clear about, is we have been taking measures to respond to the existence of the disease, but we've also been taking proactive measures to make sure that it doesn't spread. And this is not a new thing. Over a year ago, under the leadership of Governor Walz and Commissioner Peterson, we created a program called Turkey Lasers, which is fun to say, and it also does good. And this is a program that stops the spread of the disease before people get it and we have to respond. An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, especially in this circumstance. So I want to assure the people of Minnesota that we are on top of this, and we always have been. And the problem would be much worse had we not been as prudent, as dedicated, and as forward-thinking as we have been for the past year and a half. So we are responding to the crisis that we have, but we are also preparing to make sure that that crisis doesn't get worse and that it can go away. So I think that we're doing some pretty good work, the best that we can, with some great leadership, and I hope that the people of Minnesota can understand and appreciate that.
Well, thank you, Senator Putnam. Commissioner just reminded me at the Board of Animal Health, at the Department of Health, at the Department of Agriculture, those websites, there's information out there for the public to be able to get those. And then I'd also like to thank our commodity groups and producer groups, whether they be the turkey producers or groups like Farmers Union and Farm Bureau. A lot of coordination. Minnesota does this well. We wanted to make sure on the front end of this, as the story came out, that you understand what's going on. At this point, we'd be glad to answer any questions.
It sounds like most of the news here is pretty good. There's some caution lights, but you're just trying to announce that you're being proactive so it doesn't get worse.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I thank all these folks. I think it's to reassure folks, and there's so much information gets out there. We want to make sure it's the most accurate information. As I said, you see this nonpartisan, and quite honestly, there's probably not a state that does it better than this, and it's to stay on the front end. And I do get a little worried this information gets out there and people hear that it's in dairy cattle and they quit buying dairy products. There's no need to do that, and that also has an economic impact we don't want to panic people on. But I think, as Representative Hansen said, we're looking across both the economic and the health side of this, and if you don't get on the front end of these things, we don't want this to be one that's jumping into humans or pets. What we're seeing, some cats be impacted. Yes, I think that's right, Tom. It's just more, but it's also a realization that, as you heard this is very seasonal, and as the migration moves, I think you're going to start to see more of these stories in the paper.
Governor Craftswood, Health Department. I'm looking at the CDC website, which indicated a wastewater signal in Olmsted County.
Yeah.
I'm wondering what that means and if it's in the human population. If that's what
Good question.
Thanks for that question. Yeah, we do. We have had 2 detections this spring in wastewater facilities. Both of those were actually followed up by negative tests a few days or a week later. So what we think that those likely indicate is contamination of the wastewater before it gets cleaned and when it's sampled by wild bird migration. So I don't think it's in the human population at this point. Thanks.
5 years to the day of COVID trauma for all of us. You learned a lot, as I did during that time, and the wastewater testing was a big one.
Forgive me if this was mentioned. Can someone talk a little bit about transmission of this particular strain of avian flu? What it looks like from potentially, I guess, mammals to birds, mammals to other mammals? What are we concerned about with this particular strain?
Yeah, certainly we're watching any and all possibilities. So the jump to dairy cattle was a shock to us last year. It was considered an individual introduction. So what that means is one dairy farm in Texas, one dairy cow somehow contracted the virus, and from there the virus mutated so it could become more infectious to dairy cattle. And that's how it spread amongst dairy cattle. So that's what we're watching. What other mutations could happen, could occur. Rep. Hansen referred to this. We're worried about this on all levels. That doesn't mean the general public is at risk. It means that we are keeping a very close eye on this and making sure that we're doing what we can to eliminate the possibility of this transferring and mutating that much more. So just understanding the virus more, understanding what nuances have caused these changes have been part of our research and how we approach it moving forward.
It actually has jumped to humans, though. It just hasn't jumped between humans yet. So can you talk about how concerning it is that, you know, each of these mutations happen, and at some point, what's going to happen if we see human-to-human interaction?
Probably a Department of Health.
Yeah, that's a good question.
All right. So, so the thing we would worry about the most in terms of transmission to people is that we would worry about a person being infected with seasonal influenza, so influenza A that is already able to be spread person to person, and that person simultaneously getting infection with H5N1, and then the virus can, in their body, its genes can reassort, is the technical term, and so kind of create a new virus that has some of the features of H5N1, but also can be spread person to person. So that's why vaccination for seasonal influenza among the general public, and in particular farm workers, is really important. Yeah, so at this point, I don't believe there's any reason to be vaccinating people from that stockpile. They do have a stockpile, and they're working on making it bigger so that if it becomes needed, it's available.
It's also not that accurate at this point, right? Because it's from earlier strains.
It is, I believe, from earlier strains, but I think they have done the research and they know that it would be effective against this particular H5N1.
Would it be effective against, say, you mentioned if it were to merge with influenza virus, create a new virus, would the vaccine still be?
Yeah, I believe so, because they are both going to be influenza A viruses, so there's a lot of ways to classify influenza viruses, but they would both be influenza A, so the vaccines would be effective.
What would be the sign that things are ratcheting up to a more alarming concern right now? What are you looking for?
So I think there's two things you could think about. One would be work being done at the CDC in terms of genomic sequencing and looking for changes in the virus that would make it spread person to person more easily. And the second would be part of the routine surveillance influenza work that is already being done at MDH, and looking for an increase in influenza cases in places or at times we shouldn't expect to be seeing those.
We're seeing a push from lawmakers to try to consider the vaccination in livestock. How much closer are we to seeing if that would be a real possibility?
Thank you.
This is a topic that's very much on the table and something we advocate for in Minnesota. We are very much proponents of developing vaccine. The point is getting the right vaccine to the right species and making sure it's effective. So there are research trials going on to develop an effective vaccine. It's a little bit of a national conversation. So there's issues with vaccinating, what it does with foreign trade. So other countries don't necessarily want vaccinated product, and we're trying to have some conversations and explain the safety and the reason for doing that. So currently we do have vaccine pilots being researched in the United States, and if they become available, Minnesota will be advocating for vaccinating.
How concerned are you about if there is another spike with the migration this spring, about the impact on prices for everything from turkey to eggs? Good question.
Yeah, and that's a great question, something we're really concerned about, and I'd back up too to, what I said earlier, when farmers open the barn door in the morning or turn on the camera to check in their barn and they say, it's today the day, I have I'm going to see sick birds, and it's a lot of stress, and so I just add that stress component right now. As the last couple of years we've seen a high stress, so we are concerned about farmers just getting out of that poultry business, especially because even though they have indemnity, it's a lot. And so I first look at that as being a concern to the overall industry, is who's going to raise our birds. We have, as I've said, a large turkey. We don't have as big a chicken industry, but we do have a pretty important chicken industry in Minnesota, both broilers and layers. And so we are concerned about it. What really is a concern as to what stage of those and who gets it, too. We don't want anybody to get it, but with eggs, for example, it's been, the layers has been what's knocked out the eggs, but then those brooders that are behind it that are raising the chicks and hatching the new ones, it takes a while to rebuild that flock. And so that's the same thing with the turkeys, too, where we have maybe it's the younger flocks that are going to repopulate, or the hens that are going to produce more poultry for those farms. And so we're watching that. Prices have, held up and things, but I worry more about the stress, and our farmers going to stay in it. And, we'll have to see. And that's why I think there's a big emphasis on, that biosecurity. And I do think, as Senator Putnam says, that those are working in a lot of places. But, Minnesota, it's a blessing to be the land of 10,000 lakes, but it's also a place where birds sit, and so that is a concern.
Outside of efforts at the state level, what are individual farmers doing to protect their flocks?
Yeah, and that's a great question. So we talked about, you hear the neat things like, I would say neat, but, innovative things like putting in lasers, but really securing your barns are important on the bigger side, making sure those access for wild bird interactions, really watching who's coming in and out of your farm every day. I just look at, on an average farm, you may have a veterinarian, a feed truck, all these different things coming out, who's coming in, which way are they coming in, where did they just come from. Those type of things are very important for our smaller producers. And I don't always like the term backyard flocks, because I just say smaller poultry raisers that are raising, maybe 5 to a couple hundred chickens. One of the things that we've seen is, not commingling water, controlling your access to other species for water, but also, watching where those birds are and things like that. So there's a lot of work going on in that. We have, working with the University of Minnesota Extension, we have best management practices that, as the governor said, are on all of our sites that we share with farmers. We work closely with the industry and meet with both the chicken and the egg association, the turkey, the milk producers, to continually go through that. We do webinars, all these type of educational components.
Can you guys explain for the general public why it's not a good idea to just let this virus run through the flock, so to speak?
Yeah, that's a great question.
Yeah, so on paper that sounds good, but this virus is nearly 100% fatal. So it's a very devastating, kind of cruel way to allow animals to die. So the depopulation is twofold. It's a humane response, but it's also to eliminate the pool of virus that's on the landscape. If we allow those flocks to remain, we're allowing that virus to remain, and we're allowing that virus to continue replicating and potentially mutating. So it's essential that we quickly and efficiently remove the virus.
That's a great question. I would just say there's some misinformation out there of people who don't think that's the way to go, and are blaming egg prices on depopulation, and the two just are not. While they may be connected to the total volume of birds, this is the way that the science protects it. So, well, we're grateful on this. I'll be glad to take some after these folks are dismissed, except for Representative Hansen, who will answer all the hard questions. If there's no more on topic, I'd take some off topic if these folks are going to go.
Governor, could you address the return to work?
Yeah, if you guys wanted. Yes.
Your reasoning on that, and it's getting some pushback.
Yeah, we've, over the time period since the pandemic and making some hybrid work options available especially during the pandemic, we have since that time had over 60% of the workforce has been in office full-time since then. And I think in coordination with our public sector partners, whether it be the counties, City of St. Paul, Minneapolis, and others, and private sector, that bringing back that workforce, making sure that it's a talented workforce. I'm proud of them. I want to keep them. I also know there's a lot of energy and ability that we can do when we're in the office a portion of the time. So I think it's the trend that's been out there. The time seems right now where we're at. I think making the case to come back, to get some of that energy while remaining flexible. We understand we've been able to hire some people, say for example in revenue, who reside more than 75 miles away from their workplace. There'll be exceptions in there for them, but I think it's just the right time. We're seeing it across both the private and the public sector. That's where things are headed.
They said that it's disrespectful. They called this blatant disrespect. They called you a
Oh, I do not want anyone to quit. I understand that workforce is tight. These are talented people. I want to keep them. I've simply done everything to make sure, whether it's been historic contracts or making sure we're protecting those workers. So that's not the case. But the fact of the matter is that we've had folks, as I said, over 60% have been back in. Those folks have been back. We've got the opportunity to bring these people back into office. I think there's a lot. Look, you call it old school or whatever, but it is certainly the practice of across the public and non-private or in private sector, the energy that comes with being back in the office, the things that we gain together. And just to be candid, I'm concerned with one of the things I have, it's not backdoor attrition, it's front door attrition for me, is we lose most of our people in the first 6 months, and I'm pretty convinced it's because they don't get into the culture, they don't get the mentorship you would normally get in a work environment, and we think this is a better way to keep them on.
Who's exempted from this amongst the employees?
Yeah, those are, I will let our folks over at Labor that are putting this in at MMB. It's a lot of folks where we've always had exemptions where people are able to, whether you have a work at home and, health issue. We also have in this one, I believe we put in for the distance of this, if you're more than 75 miles to do it. This is a hybrid model. We're asking 50% of the time. As I said, over 60% have been full-time and another chunk of them have been hybrid. And those will be individually decided on each case because, again, this isn't just blanket coverage for everybody. We take care of our employees, and if there's individual situations come up, we'll work with them.
Unilateral decision that sort of skirts around union representatives and
Oh yeah, look, I'm a union member, but I'm also the state's chief executive, and just like others, I have to make decisions of a workforce of about 40,000 people. About 25,000 of them have been in office the whole time. The others have been in some form of hybrid, and at the end of the day, I work closely with them. I value their right to collectively bargain. These types of decisions I have to make on certain things, just much like we do on some of the others. So I'll continue to work with them. I understand the frustration on this. If there's some folks that in this it works, but again, I'm saying we're going to work with you on it. It's a 50% return, which is again pretty much where folks are at, and I'll continue to make sure that the state of Minnesota is an employer of choice, a great place where people want to work, and I want to keep them. I want to do everything possible, and I'll advocate this spring for operating adjustments in my budget that allows us to keep this talented workforce. That's the management of each of the agencies, and then they do the management of the day-to-day, just like attendance and things that are happening. You work with that. That will come out in each one. And look, these are all different. We've got from snowplow drivers to epidemiologists to CPAs to marine biologists, and they all work on different paces. Those are done individually. I don't micromanage that. The expectation is, though, that we'll get our workforce back in the office 50% of the time, hybrid. And as I said again, each situation's an individual. You work with your bosses, just like any of you do when you have situations come up. Yeah, sure.
The State Compensation Council has a draft recommendation to give you a significant raise along with other executive officers. Will you accept another raise?
No. No, I will not, but I will say this about this. That State Compensation Council was put together because, going back to a segue from our last conference, folks who are serving in public service, they don't expect to get rich, but they should be fairly compensated. And to get people to do these jobs, you have to make sure that we at least have some type of parity with the private sector. And we put a compensation council together so it would be removed from the politics. These folks would make a recommendation of what should be, and then they would put it into play. And I think it's appropriate. I think what they come up with is the numbers that I support for others. I have simply said, because of being a person who's at the top of that and puts the council together, that I will not accept mine, but I certainly encourage the others to accept what is fair, making sure we get the best quality people into state government.
Because you have turned down previous raises that
Yes.
you're still at the same salary since, I think, 18, right?
Yes.
And that's
Yes.
because you just don't think.
I just don't want to give the I think I work hard, but I also don't want to give the impression this is about the state workforce or whatever. I don't want this to be an issue about the governor's trying to pay himself. I think I'm compensated fairly by the state of Minnesota for the work I do at this point, but I think going forward it makes sense to have it be fair. And the state of Minnesota was, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, well below where others were in these similar positions, and that just brings us closer up to parity. Yeah. Yeah.
Policy, downtown St. Paul has suffered a lot by not having the state employees here. How much of that economic picture for the capital city?
Well, Well, I'm always concerned with all of our cities, and I think this is something that has been mentioned. I think private sector employees, as well as the city of St. Paul, Mayor Carter's talked about this. It's not solely based on that, but that's certainly a benefit of that. And for those who are wondering about this, we've been working on this for quite some time. This move was conveyed to Lunds before they announced their decision, so that was not the sole factor for them to make the decision they made. But you know, it was when I started to hear rumors that was happening, and we have been working on this. It seemed to make sense to me that we should communicate that. But it does matter. I think you'll see more of that energy back downtown. And again, this is it's a hybrid. People will figure this out.
Is there space for the workers, though? I know the state is consolidated.
Pardon me?
Is there space for
Yeah, and that's why we thought about this, and that's why there's the 50% as a part of this. We know that one of the issues is where do people park, where's the workforce. We've shrunk some of our footprint that's there, and this has been thought through by the managers. That's why this takes some time to work through, and we believe this is the right place. There is space for them. They're able to be there. And again, I think you're going to see it, and I don't know if this is generational or not, but I think there's a power in teams when they're together. I think there's an opportunity to be in office, and I will stress this again. I was deeply concerned, and one of the things that helped sway my decision was this attrition rate in those first 6 months, because, and I'm convinced part of that was the support network was not there as strongly as it could have been, and we hope this makes a difference. Yeah.
Another topic, the health department announced today more than $200 million cut in federal grants. Thoughts on that and the impact that could have on
Oh yeah, and again, these folks are moving. This is good bipartisan, and we're working together. I would be remiss if I didn't say this. We're fighting this fight against a backdrop of the very funds we're using to do some of this stuff is being pulled from us. And I think we saw it, whether it was Ebola, and then the Doge folks said, oh, that was a mistake, we put it back in, to the impact we have on things like H5N1. And so we will try and make it work. We're still trying to understand this. I just can't stress enough the lack of management and organization of the chaos that is created of giving the dollars, pulling them back, giving the dollars. Earlier this morning, I was over at the VA with folks at the VA hospital, one of the nation's 4 polytrauma centers, talking about the 83,000 in cuts and the number of people who received a letter and said they're gone. I talked to the average Minnesotan, and they may think government should be more streamlined, but they think there should be a cohesive reasoning for why these things are done, and it's these types of moves right at a time when we're seeing influenza, we're seeing a measles outbreak, we're seeing a pulling down of some of these resources. So yes, I'm concerned about it. We saw last week, and this is the one that boggles my mind, we had the money that USDA gave to purchase local food, to create local networks for food production that went into our schools and local food banks, for that to be pulled back. And the mixed message we're getting from Health and Human Services that we need to eat less dyes, less processed food, more natural foods, and we need to buy American. That very program did all those things, and it was cut. And that's where we're trying to grapple with. How do we make sense, and how do we make a good faith effort to not just say we oppose everything you're doing, but tell us how that move or this move on this health dollars that you don't know where they were going is going to help us prevent what we're afraid of. Commissioner Peterson and I were talking about this. If this goes, we learned a lot since 2015. That's why we're in a lot better space on this. 2015 was, $1.5 billion of economic impact and a traumatic impact across farm country when this thing was not, we didn't know what to do. We hadn't had an experience. We now have that experience, but will we have the tools to fight it? So I'm grateful you covered this. We'll give you more update on it. And so, yep.
On your Lens comment, so you were saying you told Lens a couple weeks ago before they made their decision?
It was just as we were hearing it and saying that we were in the process of working through this, and I just wanted to know from them, and talking to the mayor of St. Paul, is how much does that impact your decision? Would this matter? And there were multiple decisions when they made that. I just wanted to make sure that if they were saying, well, the downtown area doesn't have as many people, that would seem like information they should know as we're working on it. So thank you all.